Welcome to This Organized Life. If you're a mom, wife, or coffee lover seeking advice on how to reduce clutter and reclaim time, look no further than your host, Lori Palau, founder of Simply Be Organized and author of Hot Mess, a practical guide to getting organized. For a lot of people, clutter is their dirty little secret, but it doesn't have to be. Each week, we will share practical tips, chat with experts, and provide strategies on how to keep you organized. I hope that by sharing our stories, you feel a little less alone and more empowered to tackle the areas that are holding you back. So let's get started.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of This Organized Life podcast. I am your host, Lori Palau, and we are a little over the midpoint of our Enneagram and Clutter summer series. And I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. I love chatting with guests, period, full stop. But I love chatting about the Enneagram, period, full stop. And so I love chatting with guests who talk about the Enneagram, who know about the Enneagram and have been using it as a tool in their lives, whether it's personally, professionally, relationally. And that's what the series is all about, is just bringing some education and awareness and seeing how you can be the best version of yourself. And I am a huge proponent of the Enneagram. This is something that I've been studying for the past 5 years. And if you want to learn more about that, I have a whole framework on my website, which you guys can go check out at simplybeorganized.com. And if you also haven't listened to the other episodes in this summer series, I highly encourage you to go back and listen, because we've had some amazing guests that have been talking about everything from, their personal to professional life, from our Enneagrams 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s. So today we are about to hear from our Enneagram Sixes, or six guest. And joining me is Angee Robertson. And Angee is, a lot of you might know her. She facilitates the Instagram handle Sixish and Know It. Professionally, she runs her own virtual assistant company in Florida. She helps other people who are interested in starting their own virtual assistant businesses, which is not unlike what I do with the SBO Partner Program, helping encourage people who want to start their own professional organizing businesses. So we have so many overlaps that we can talk about. But I specifically invited Angee on the show today to talk about her life as an Enneagram Six. And she's going to elaborate on that. Obviously, the Enneagram Sixes are the Loyalists. We're going to talk a little bit about what their core motivation is, how that shows up in her life, how she learned about the Enneagram, and how she kind of has used this as a tool to help her be the best version of herself, professionally and personally. So without further ado, let me welcome my friend Angee Robertson to the show. Welcome, Angee.
Thank you, Lori, for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I am so excited. So tell our listeners, I gave a very top line overview, but tell our listeners a little bit about who you are, and then we can kind of dive into how you even got started with the Enneagram.
Okay, perfect. So yes, I have been running my own virtual assistant practice for the last 20 years. It's absolutely the perfect business for an Enneagram Six because you have that loyalist, and I have one client that's been with me for 15 of those 20 years. So it gives you any indication that my sixness comes out in that for sure. And I work with clients virtually all over the world throughout the years, and really love it. And now just recently, about 2 years ago, I opened up my own school to help anyone that's interested in becoming a virtual assistant to start their own business so that they can have their own thriving practice. And I certainly kind of tap in a little bit to Enneagram Sixes and 1s, because they kind of both like the admin role. They love that commitment and loyalty and being able to solve problems and also organize and be detailed, which are perfect for both of those Enneagram numbers.
I was just going to say, I was curious to know if you see like trends, because obviously and I have a virtual assistant. I mean, the value, especially for entrepreneurs out there who there's things that need to happen from accounting to administrative to back end, website stuff, everything that need, email marketing, you name it, all of the nuts and bolts of your business that need to happen. If you don't have time to do it, hiring a VA I highly recommend it. I've employed VAs for the better part of my professional career. But what I was going to say was, you need to have a really strong attention to detail to do that job.
Yeah.
So do you start to see trends now that you're working with other people, that there's certain Enneagram types? Obviously,
I haven't really seen a whole lot of trends yet in terms of like the types of clients that come in and work with VAs. I have seen and run a couple of polls, especially on the Sixers and I Know It page, that a lot of sixes are drawn to the admin fields. They do kind of show up into that in that field, and ones as well is another one that tends to be drawn to that field.
Okay, I have some ideas about that. So talk a little bit about, for most of our listeners, especially if they've been around our show for a little bit of a time, have some familiarity with the Enneagram and the different types. But in case somebody is new or doesn't know, can you just give an overview, like a 10,000 foot overview of what the characteristics are of an Enneagram Six?
Sure. So for an Enneagram Six, our kind of core motivation is fear itself. We kind of see worst case scenario, and that can, a lot of times that can come across as a negative, and people see that as a negative. Oh my gosh, you're always, worried about the other shoe dropping, if you will. But I always look at worst case scenario, and a lot of sixes feel this way as well. We're really out there to help people see pitfalls that they wouldn't normally see. And so that's one of our gifts and our superpowers, I like to call it, is that we get to see holes in your plan that you would never know. And we bring those to the forefront so you can say, oh my gosh, I totally missed that. And I can, now I can go and do something about it. Which again makes for a great virtual assistant as well, because we see that as sixes, we see those pitfalls. We're in the head triad. We tend to live in our head a lot, much like ones live in their heads, where ones have a critical committee in their head. Sixes just have a committee that's just talking all the time and giving ideas and thoughts and different things. And you're just constantly thinking worst case scenario. And it's not so much criticism as it is just always thinking and planning ahead and kind of thinking about what might happen. So that's one of the other characteristics. The other one is what I alluded to a minute ago, is that we're loyalists. So we are loyal, and we love to connect with people. We love to make real strong bonds, and we love to forge deep relationships. And we like to go deep with people more than we like surface conversations. The other side to that, though, is the minute, we also have we don't learn to trust ourselves. And so we're always seeking outside authority. And so as soon as we'll trust authority until we don't trust authority. And then when we don't trust authority, we are flat out like write them off, kind of, done with you, don't trust you anymore. So it can kind of be sticky on both ends.
I think that's really fascinating. Well, first of all, thanks for walking us through that. And I couldn't help. And a lot of what I'm saying is just complete broad stroke generalization. So please don't shoot the messenger, people. Take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. I wonder, I'm curious, because if a lot of the people that could use, everybody that's an entrepreneur, I think could pretty much use a virtual assistant. Again, I said that, but I feel like threes, because they're very big picture people. And we just, we're recording this on the day that we just dropped our episode with twos and threes. And my husband's a three. And I know details are not his specialty. He's very big picture. And so I would think that a 6-3 combo would be really beneficial, because you would be kind of going over, or sixes or ones that are kind of going over that with a fine-tooth comb to see kind of those potholes that perhaps that big picture, visionary type three would just put out there. Might be something. I was just kind of
sure. Well, and plus as a six, we go to 3 in stress actually, and we go to 9 in health. So yeah, there is that correlation. We can understand a 3 and where they're coming from. And I will say, I mean, I haven't really sat down to say, okay, what's the common number that shows up? But I do see a lot of threes come in. I see a lot of eights come in too, come in for virtual assistants. And eights are powerhouses to work with. I love working with eights because they are very focused. They know where they're going. And when they get somebody they trust, they offload the details and they want to focus on what they're meant to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And for people that are just listening, I like raised my hand because, as you know, I'm an 8. And that's the thing is I don't want to micromanage you. Like, I trust you to do your thing. And if I delegate it and you tell me you've got it, I'm like, good to go.
Yeah.
That's it. Just give me an update. And
exactly. Which I love. I personally love working with eights. And I've worked with a lot. I've worked with a lot of eights through my business. So yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think it's great. And I love the fact, I think it does make a lot of sense that sixes thrive in the admin space. And again, for anybody that's new to the Enneagram, I don't want to stereotype and say, if you're this type, you should have this job, or this type, you should have that. Any Enneagram type could be in any career. There are just certain roles or industries that tend to lend themselves to different types, but that's not, again, a general blanket statement. But because I feel that a lot of times sixes like having, you said, that default of having some direction, that would lend itself to like, tell me what you want. And then you're comfortable in, when you are comfortable in where your own space is, then you can thrive. Yeah. But it's when you're unsure. And that's where I think a lot of times the clutter piece comes in. And that's where I'd love to really kind of steer this conversation, is there's so much unknown and overwhelm when it comes to clutter and organization. And for sixes who oftentimes doubt themselves, do you see that? I'm curious from your perspective in your life, how that's kind of presented itself in terms of that, aspect.
Well, for me, I tend to, and I did a poll of the community because I wanted to make sure I wasn't like a different weirdo six or anything, because I wanted to represent the majority of sixes here. And it went one of two ways. It went one way where sixes felt that overwhelm and like not knowing where to start and kind of not having that direction, like you were saying. And then there was the other that said, I need to be organized because that gives me peace and that helps to keep me calm. Mm-hmm. And I'm not feeling chaotic and I don't have anxiety. I fall more into that category where I need to have my space cleared so that I feel more calm and grounded. And then I'm not in angst and I'm not overstimulated. My space is very neutral colors. I don't have I have black, white, gray, and tan, or like my basic, but it keeps me having that neutral space keeps me I'm not overstimulated with things, because there's so much. I'm overstimulated with my work, managing multiple clients, and outside the world is overstimulating. Social media is overstimulating. So I need a place that's not, and that would be my home for me.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I think that's really fascinating. And I like that because, and I think that could be true for a lot of types, is you have, you're either not either or, but like there are some people that kind of fall into one spectrum versus, the other type. And I know for me, some of the experience that I've seen with my clients, like I remember a few years ago before COVID, I had, when it was probably, so I started my podcast in 2017, and that was also the year I released my book. And so it was probably around 2018 or so, I started getting like a lot of outreach from people that were outside of my geographic area, because before that I was, servicing people and I had kind of a reputation locally, but then all of a sudden I had this like bigger, following, if you will. And so I started getting people that were reaching out to me that were saying, do you travel? What do you do? And that's also around the same time I started the SBO partner program to help connect them with other professional organizers that were local to them. But what I started doing is saying, because at that time I didn't have any kind of structure set up for that. And so I started saying, well, I can help with some kind of like virtual coaching. This is again before virtual was as big as it was in the professional organizing space. And I can give you like a roadmap, but I'm not there because you live in Seattle and I'm in Pennsylvania. And a couple people liked it. And it was something that I didn't set out to do, but it was kind of like just by default. But I noticed a lot of people were like, no. I really want you to come and like sit with me and go through it with me. And you're not supposed to type people, and I'm not typing people, but I guess I've hypothesized over the years, are a lot of the people that really want that one-on-one support, like, do they fall into that 6 camp? Because most of the time I'm just validating what they're already knowing. I'm just I'm giving them permission. Like when I'm sitting with somebody, I'm giving them, okay, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to put the strategy. But then at the end of the day, they're making the decisions. I'm just saying, way to go, or maybe challenging them a little bit. But I think sometimes once people get that, again, that permission, air quote, because nobody needs my permission, but they feel that permission of that they're not making a wrong decision or that they're on the right track. That's when they feel empowered to do it on their own.
Yeah. And that's where that 6s don't trust themselves. They seek outside authority to validate really what they already know. I mean, it's just they aren't trusting themselves. That's a big, one of the biggest issues I face for myself as a 6 is that trusting authority. And having to learn how to do that.
So how do you navigate that? If somebody's out there listening and saying, oh my gosh, I struggle with that too. Like, what are some of the things that you've done to kind of work through that? And obviously, this has been, and actually we didn't even get into, how did you learn about the Enneagram? Let's put a pin in that question and go back to kind of your Enneagram journey.
Sure. It was probably about 5 years ago. I have no idea how I came across the book, The Road Back to You by Suzanne Stabile and Ian Cron. Somehow I got my hands on that book. I think if I think back correctly, my husband, we were concerned that he might have Asperger's syndrome. And so I was doing some research. Somehow I came across the Enneagram and it was intriguing to me. I found the book and started reading the numbers, and I got to a 9 and I was like, oh my gosh, this is my husband so much. And it's like him to a T. So I took the book to him and let him read it. And he was like, oh my gosh, this is me. Like, what did you write? What did somebody interview me? I mean, it spoke to him so much. And he felt, and we both said, oh, you don't have Asperger's. Like, he took the test and he doesn't have it, Asperger's syndrome, but it was like, oh my gosh, this is why you act and react and do things the way that you do. It's based off of the characteristics of this number, this Enneagram number. So that set me off into just researching more. Of course, I didn't know my number, and being a 6, that's very common for a 6 not to know their number and like not agree with being a 6.
Yes. And if you, and again, for anybody that follows, I was told, I don't know if this is still true or not true, but that 6s are the most common type.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too. Yeah.
And it's interesting because I personally don't have a lot of 6s in my life.
Yeah.
I have a lot of other types, but 6s are not as common in my personal space, unless they're just, again, not identified.
Right. They may be mistyped or something.
Or mistyped.
Which they very well can be. A lot of them will mistype as 2s. Sometimes they'll mistype as 1s.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I took the test. I can't tell you how many times I took a test. And then I found out really a test is kind of not the foolproof thing. You just kind of need to dive into it.
Absolutely.
I mean, I took the test so many times, and every time I came back, but I came back as, what was interesting, I would come back as a 7. I would come back as a 9. I would come back as a 2. And so it all fit. It's just that wasn't my number. But I had the opportunity to go see Suzanne Stabile in person right before the pandemic happened, right before everything shut down.
She's great. I've gone to a bunch of her in-person workshops.
It was so awesome. It was a Know Your Number workshop. I went. It was a 2-day workshop. My husband and I both went. And I was like, I'm going to find out what my number is once and for all. I'm done with this second guessing. When my husband, every time she'd go through a number, I'd look at him. He's like, that's not you. when she got to the sixes, he was like, that's you. And I was crying because I felt like I finally had words to my actions. Like I had a description of how I felt and how I show up, and I could put words to it now. And somebody understood that. And I knew then that was absolutely my number, was being a six. And I embraced it.
I
Yeah.
love that. And I agree because, and I always say, I think it's what I love about the Enneagram is that it helps to give you language. It gives
Yes.
language and context. Again, not an excuse for poor behavior,
Exactly.
but it also just a lot of times people don't know how to explain why they, and especially, and I see this with clutter a lot, where why does it stress you out so much? Like, why do you feel the need to control this situation? And when you have this understanding, you have this language and this knowledge, you can then either stop yourself and kind of work through the strategies. You can also have some grace for yourself in those spaces. And you can lean into the parts of you that are really awesome, like you said, that are the superpowers, and maybe the areas that are a little bit more struggling. Like if you know that you're somebody that is prone to, the anxiety, fear piece, if emotional clutter is something that you might struggle with, and we'll get to that. What parameters, what boundaries can you put into your own life to say, okay, I'm starting to fall into this behavior. Let me go through this checklist or whatever to say, is this true? Is this fact? Do I need this? Do I not? But without having that knowledge of where this is coming from, you're just in this fight or flight mode.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the other thing I love about the Enneagram is it brings to light and it brings your awareness. So you start to pause for a minute and recognize, oh, I'm spinning right now. I'm in my head and I'm spinning and I'm doing worst case scenario. Okay, what's that about? And it just helps bring awareness, and you start to pay attention more to yourself and how you respond to things. And you can recognize those patterns so that you can move more towards the healthy 9, in my case, as a 6.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk about something that you mentioned earlier, which is about being in the head triad. And I want to just elaborate on that a little bit and talk about the different types of clutter, because I think that'll just segue really nicely. So sit tight, everybody, and we will be right back. All right, Angee. So you mentioned earlier that 6s are in the head triad. And again, I know what that is, but for people that are out there that might not. So there are 3 centers of intelligence that it's called in the Enneagram world, which are thinking, feeling, and doing. And so within the Enneagram spectrum of core numbers, you have a dominant center for everybody, and you either fall into being in the head triad, which means that you are thinking dominant, you fall in the gut triad, which means that you are doing dominant, or feeling dominant, which you're in the heart triad. And so for 6s, along with 5s and 7s, so 5, 6, and 7s are in the head triad, meaning that they are thinking dominant. So it would make sense that you would be in your head a bit. And I know you're a 6 with a 5 wing, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Right. So you definitely are thinking, because 5s are analytical thinkers. So you are constantly, your wheels are always turning when it comes to that thought process, which can be really great until that thought prohibits you from taking action.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I guess for me, it would be helpful if you could share with our audience. And we talked a little bit about this again with, you said you need that physical space to be calm and soothing. So we hear it at Simply Be Organized and this Organized Life podcast, talk about 3 main types of clutter: your physical clutter, stuff that you see, dishes in the sink, laundry, toys, all that stuff. Your, what I call emotional clutter, which is the feelings either that stems from either guilt, fear, sentimental value, things of that nature that hold you back from taking action, or what I call calendar clutter, which is that time management piece. And that again could stem from, like, for example, like a 2 could struggle with calendar clutter because they have trouble saying no, setting healthy boundaries. Again, very, very much stereotyping. But I'm wondering for you, in your own words, if any of the three, which one speaks to you the most in terms of like dominant for you?
I would say emotional, for sure, because we do have that fear that we're always up against, whether it shows in worst case scenario, oh, I might need this one day,
Mhm.
or it can go to the other side of not trusting myself enough to take the action, and I'll just let something sit, or just not deal with it.
Yeah.
So I would say it's kind of funny because in some respects, as sixes, we can be kind of shut off from our emotions at times. So it's funny to say emotional, but then sometimes feel like we're cut off, but that does play into emotions as well. So yeah, I would definitely say a six. And
And
I see that with other sixes. Like when I did the kind of polled the community, that's the kind of the sense that I got as well, was
um,
emotional.
well, thank you for validating me and the work that I'm doing. Okay. I'm glad that, good, right answer, right answer. No, but, and and I'm glad that you said that about the emotional, because I think most people think emotional, sad or dramatic, just that's kind of the word, the image that conjures up. But what I found is that there's kind of different types of emotional clutter. You have those people that are, let me stroll down memory lane. Let me be everything, my daughter's a 4 and everything has feelings. So there's that level of emotional clutter, but it's not fear-based. It's not that
Mhm.
what if scenario. And so
Yeah.
even before I knew the Enneagram, like I developed this framework, the physical emotional calendar, this was like early on in my career. And so that's when I started to learn the Enneagram. I started saying, okay, well, how can we weave these together? And I started seeing, well, a lot of times sixes struggle with that indecision, which is what I call one of the 5 clutter pitfalls, right? Our 5 clutter pitfalls, again, and everybody can struggle with them, but for different reasons. So they're procrastination, which is I'll get to it later. Indecision, which is I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to put it over here, because if I don't do anything, I can't make a mistake. And I see that probably is something that could be like a through line for sixes.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you've got guilt, which may or may not be, but again, I feel like guilt's really big for a 2, you
Mm.
know. And then you've got overwhelm, which is just, I think we all can struggle with just overwhelm. We're just getting to this point of like, I don't know what to do. And then time, which is just, I don't have the time to do it. And so again, what I found is each Enneagram type can struggle with any of those, but for completely different reasons, right? A 1 is going to procrastinate for a very different reason than a 7.
Sure.
And that's really what we want to look at is, okay, so if we know we're doing this, what are the strategies that we can put into place? And so that kind of can bring me back to my earlier question, which is for you, especially in your career, what strategies have you found to live an organized life?
For me, I think it's like I was saying earlier, just being aware and knowing, and giving myself grace when I start to see a pattern, but noticing it and giving myself grace to make a correction on that and kind of course correct.
Mhm.
I think that's been huge for me, is just to be aware, really. I mean, and that's been the study of the Enneagram doing that. It's been for the last 5 years now. I've been kind of studying it, and it's always, I'm always learning something, and I'm always uncovering something. Um, you know, Having the 6 page, really, and Instagram really kind of helped as well, and being around that community, and surrounding myself with other sixes, and just kind of supporting each other, that's really helped, to know and to be able to grow further and to move more into the healthy side of a 6, which means that I am tapping a little bit more into my 9 and being peaceful, and just kind of allowing things to go if they need to go. Like if, especially living with a 9 who
I
is
was gonna, I
very
was, I was gonna
relaxed.
say, because you have that dynamic, right? There's
Hmm.
that kind of 3-6-9 dynamic.
Yes. Yeah.
What is that relationship like?
It's great. I have to be careful that he doesn't, I always want to make sure, and I tell him this, we joke about it, but I'm also very serious that he, because nines, they have a voice, but they don't realize they have a voice. And so I'm always trying to affirm him that, your voice matters. And I want to know what you want to do. And I want to know, what matters to you. We were complete opposites when it came to organizing. He is very much, I might need this one day, and like keeps all the things. And I've been able to move beyond that to where if I need it one day, I'll just go buy another one. That's kind of the way I've adopted now.
Sure.
And now he's starting to, and I had to let him get there on his own. I didn't want him to do it because nines tend to merge. So they'll merge to keep peace. They'll merge to be with people. And so I want to make sure that he came to that on his own, where he's starting to say, you know what, I don't need this. I can go get another one if I need it, and kind of adopt that same philosophy and seeing that way. But it was a struggle for a little bit, and to where, he has his office now, and like that's his space, and I don't tell him what he needs to do in there. I let him, if he wants stacks of paper everywhere, he can have, that's not my domain, that's his.
Sure.
But everything else needs to be organized around for my sanity. So it's also not trying to project what I want onto him and force him into something that's just not his nature. So yeah.
And I think, again, people underestimate, and, correct me if you feel otherwise, but people underestimate the power of what your physical space looks like and how you are able to be productive and calm and anxiety, like to reduce anxiety. So many people, when they are in a space that is chaotic, and then they are chaotic, they don't always connect the dots that if I were to, and again, not that it's a cure-all, not that if you have an empty desk or a kitchen counter that doesn't have anything on it, that means you're going to be like, a Zen person all the time, but there is a connection point between this. And I'm wondering, especially since I would say you're prone to that anxiety, being an Enneagram 6, your wheels are always turning, I would suspect, right?
Yes.
Of, like you said, and I'm hoping you can elaborate a little bit on kind of that that committee of people in your head, or this, how that plays out, because I think when that's always going, having the serenity of your physical space being organized probably helps to maybe neutralize that a little bit. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's like what I was saying earlier. This is my home is a key. It's not overstimulating to me. I need that because I am overstimulated in my head just from all the messages. We're the most plugged in generation of information. We're in information overload, if you will. And so it's super important. And I would say I wasn't always like this, and my space didn't really reflect me until maybe about 7 years ago. And I really started to kind of understand more of who I was. And then when I found the Enneagram, I really started to understand more of who I was. And so then my space started to reflect more of the healthy side of me, and more of the way I operate in my business. And it started to, all kind of connect. But not to say that I still don't have that those, just always thinking, constantly thinking worst case scenario. It could be something that I'm having to deal with, or it can be something a client, I'm having to help a client with. Always just thinking about what if. That's a constant with me. My husband, when he found out, when we both realized I was a 6, and he started to understand and really start to learn more about how a 6 is, he loves to go to Disney World. He absolutely loves it. It's his favorite place. I cannot stand it because it's so overstimulating for me, but I didn't have words to tell him that.
Right.
And so when he started to understand, and like, especially if he wanted me to go on a roller coaster-y type ride, a real daredevil type ride, I would literally almost have a panic attack, because I'm thinking of how I could die on that ride.
Okay, well, I'm an 8 and I think that too. So my family has banned me from going to amusement parks with them because I am a nervous, and I'm not a nervous Nelly in a lot of most areas of my life, but I'm like, I could be a 6. If you could, I know you can't switch types, but if I could switch a type in a situation, I would be channeling my inner 6.
Well, that's me. So when he finally understood that, he goes, I understand now why you don't like Disney World. I understand why you're panicked when I ask you to go on a ride. I get it now. And I'm like, thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's the beauty of understanding the Enneagram type and like getting to really understand you. And like you were saying, it's not to box you in or to make you have an excuse for any type of behavior. It's just really helps you to put language and awareness to who you are and how you kind of function and respond to things.
Let me ask you another question. So do you feel, because I've also worked with some clients that, again, because they have that kind of self-doubt, I have found that visual reminder or like visual prompts are really helpful to, I don't want to say, I'm trying to think of even the right word, but to encourage them to keep moving forward. So let me give you like a practical real life example. So I have a client that I've worked with for years. I suspect she's a 6. Again, don't know for sure, but I suspect that she is. And so I had taken some before pictures, kind of like before and after pictures, if you will. And we've been working together on and off for several months on like different aspects of her home. And one day she was just feeling really dejected. Like, I feel like every time I, start to get ahead, something happens and I kind of fall off my organizing bandwagon. And I pulled up some pictures from like when we first started. And I was like, look at how far you've come. Yes, you might not be exactly where you want to be, but like, I'm showing you, like, look at how much better or further along you are than you're giving yourself credit for. And I think you could plug that into anything. You could plug that into weight loss or, an exercise. You could plug that into finances, but just having that, whether it's checking stuff off a to-do list, do you find that having some sort of visual prompts is a tool that has been helpful for you?
Yeah, I would call it, for me, examples. Examples or even reflection.
Okay.
I do really well with examples. If I have an example of something, then that helps me. And I think that probably goes back to that authority piece and why we seek out authority is we're really seeking out authority to be that example of what we're already capable of doing, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so for me, examples are huge. I mean, here's a nerdy kind of organizing thing. About a year ago, I digital journal. So I use an iPad and I have an app and I do all my journaling digitally. Well, I decided I want to take all my handwritten, like hard copy journals and scan them into my digital journal. So I would have everything in one place. So I did that. I took that task on, scan them all in. And now what I'd love doing is today, I would go back however many years I might have an entry for this exact day, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and read to see what was I experiencing then? What was I thinking about? What was going on in my life? And I'm absolutely loving it because it helps me to see where I've been and where I'm going and what I was experiencing then. And oh my gosh, I'm still experiencing that now.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that. That's, I think that's a really great exercise. That seems like a lot of work, but I mean, I think I think that's great. But yeah, that does make a lot of sense to be able to kind of document your progress, if you will.
Yeah. Sure.
And I guess being in the head triad and with that 5 wing of knowing that, like, having that research and facts is what's going to also help you to take action, is probably really helpful for you versus a 6 with a 7 wing. That is a whole other, with the 7s being our, kind of our free spirit people. So
they're the fun.
They're
so much fun.
They are so much fun. All right. So before we take our last break, is there any other specific kind of words of wisdom that you, or whether it's advice or just tips, anything for our fellow sixes, or maybe somebody that lives with a six, parents a six, has a six as a roommate, on just best practices, especially in the realm of clutter and organization?
I would say, um, more of like, just kind of pay attention, like I was saying, really start to understand, learn more about you as a six and what is involved with being a six. I mean, the Enneagram is so complex and so deep. There's so much to learn. And the more you learn, it's more layers. It's like peeling an onion.
I say that all the time.
Yeah. You're just peeling them back and you're learning more. And the more that you're aware, the more you can start to recognize your own patterns and the more graceful you can be with yourself. I think that's a big piece, is just understanding and recognizing that, you're not perfect and that's okay. And, here's how you can maneuver through that. I think just understanding that piece and having that awareness is super powerful. And every six is going to be a little bit different. If you have a six with a 5 wing versus a 6 wing, there's so many other complexities that you can have. But just knowing, understanding more about what's really true for you, and just owning that, if you will, and being able to receive that.
And I think that's great. And I just want to also add on, because we do also have a lot of other professional organizers who listen to our show. And so for people that are using the Enneagram as a tool to help as they're working with clients, one of the wonderful benefits of knowing the Enneagram and being able to kind of incorporate that into my practice when I'm working one-on-one with people is to be able to hold space for them. Because knowing that a six, especially if they are not as sophisticated in knowing the Enneagram at all, or kind of where their pitfalls are, and they just know that they have this fear, this anxiety. And when they're working to declutter, if they feel like this need to hold on to things for that what if worst case scenario, I might need this, I might need that. Factor that in, right? To factor that in, that their decision making is not going to be as quick as if you were working with an 8 or a 3 or some of the other types on the Enneagram. They are going to care. They are going to maybe struggle a little bit. And it, just like I say with my 4s, and I've learned this just as a parent working with my daughter, is, a test that might take me 5 minutes might take her 20. And that's, again, not for all 4s, but, I just know now that I'm going to give myself that time so that she could work through that process of going through, okay, what's the likelihood I will need this? How often have I had to come back to it? Like, I have a whole checklist of kind of questions and prompts that can go for anybody, but specifically targeted for 6s, to help them to say, all right, is this my own head or is this fact? And when you're looking at the facts, I probably can get rid of this. If I'm just getting into my own fear-based head, this is where I'm being bottlenecked. And so for anybody that is going to be working with somebody as they're navigating through their clutter, just remember that they need to work through that process. Don't force feed it. Don't say, quick, you got to make a decision right this second, because it's not always as easy.
Yeah. And I'll add just real quick. 6s ask a lot of questions. We ask a lot of questions, and just being able to allow them the space to ask those questions, because that'll also help them to build trust and authority, which they're coming to you, if you're a professional organizer, they're coming to you as that authority person. So allowing them those questions. Yeah.
I love that. That's great. Okay. So before we go to our last break, just tell our listeners, where can they find you, connect up, learn more, all the things?
Sure. So on Instagram, I am on the Six-ish and I Know It page. You can find me there. And then also my website, which is angeerobertson.com, and it's ANGEE and Robertson.com. Yeah.
And we will link up to all things Angee. So yes, any of our people out there that are entrepreneurs that might be looking for a virtual assistant, look up Angee.
Yes,
She's
look
pretty
me up.
awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. We're going to take one more quick break and then we're going to just put you in the hot seat for our wrap up questions. So sit tight. All right, Angee, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing about sixes. I could talk about the Enneagram all day, but I know we both have jobs to do. So I will not keep you all day. But before I do let you go, we always ask our guests a few questions. So the first question that I love to ask is, I don't know if you're a reader or not, but if you are, what is a book that has been really inspirational? You can't say the word back to you.
Darn it.
Ah,
That's what I had.
No, you can. You totally can. It's fine. I was going to say, so yeah, a book that's been really transformational in your life, and you totally can say it. So it's fine.
Yeah. It would be The Road Back to You. I mean, that's one that I go back to frequently, because not only am I learning about my own number, I want to learn about others. And, like you said, you don't want to ever type somebody, but to recognize things in others to kind of be able to help you navigate working with, dealing with people, working with people, because people are complex. So having that kind of knowledge of thinking somebody might be this number, it just helps you to kind of approach things and have a little bit more compassion for someone, for sure.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And it's one of my go-to books at all. I remember the year it came out, I had gotten it and I gave it to people for Christmas. I bought like 10 copies and I was like, here, and I was like sticking it to everybody's stocking. And half the people haven't read it, I'm sure, but now I'm like, don't you remember I gave you that book?
Exactly.
So yes, I'm a big believer in that book as well.
Yeah.
You'll have to check out our episode. I had Ian on our show a couple of years ago when I first kicked off my Enneagram stuff. So
Awesome.
That was awesome. Anyway, okay. Now our last question that we ask every guest, which is, in this particular season of your life, where do you feel the most organized and where do you feel like a bit of a hot mess?
Gosh. I mean, my home, I definitely, try to keep that as organized as possible for that very reason, just not to be overstimulated. A hot mess, any space that I share with my husband is I love him dearly. He's just different. He's different in the way that he handles things. And he does have that tendency to kind of keep things because he thinks he might need it one day, but he's getting way better. He's so much better than he was. But yeah, any area of the house, whether it's, his office, like I said, but that's his domain, the garage, that's all his stuff too. But yeah, I would say those would be the areas where,
That's so funny. That's awesome. Well, thank you very much, Angee, for coming on our show. Thank you for facilitating this awesome group of Sixes to Know It, and for polling your people when you were asking these questions. So I think it's so great. And if this is your first time tuning in, welcome to our show. We are all over on YouTube and on social media, this Organized Life podcast. You can also check out all of our offerings, including digital courses and frameworks and checklists and all the things at simplybeorganized.com. All of our links to everything that we talk about are in our show notes. And we release new episodes every Thursday. So make sure that you click the subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can have all new episodes downloaded each and every week. So until then, I'm Lori Palau. Peace out. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, please spread the love and share it with your friends. And if this is your first time joining us, make sure to click the subscribe button wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, please leave us a review so other people know that our show is worth the listen. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram at This Organized Life Podcast. And if you'd like to connect with us, you can head on over to our website at simplythelletterborganized.com, which is filled with tons of resources, including free downloads, checklists, links to our amazing organizing partners, and all of our digital offerings. I'll see you next week for another episode of This Organized Life.